Well, welcome to our Debate 201 showcase. I'm Dr. Carrie Morowski. I am a senior instructor here at Capital Debate. I'm from Roanoke, Virginia, and during the school year, I'm an assistant professor of communication studies at Roanoke College. I'll let Zach introduce himself.
Hey there, my name is Zach Chow, and I'm the assistant instructor for this course. I had a pretty good debate career, ranked 4th in the country for congressional debate, and ended up winning the World Schools Invitational for the entire United States. I guess I've hosted a couple international countries too. Anyways, these days I am a super senior at the University of Florida, majoring in political science and journalism, and I also work as an opinion writer for 2 different newspapers.
We are really proud of our students this week. Moving from Debate 101 to Debate 201, it's such a big difference. Your students go from presenting a 4-minute speech to participating in a full debate in just a week's difference, and that's an amazing accomplishment. Before we start, I want to talk about each one of our students individually and just kind of give them appreciations and talk about what they've achieved this week. First student I'll start with is Aman. Aman is one of our experts in research. She's a really hard worker. She takes feedback really well, and she's always kind of reaching for and pushing herself to take that next step in terms of debate and public speaking skills. Next, I'll talk about Ava Grace. Ava Grace is one of our expert extemporaneous speakers, and she's really engaging when she speaks, and you'll see that during her debate. And it's really a challenge to speak extemporaneously. You know what you need to say, you've researched it, but with minimal notes, completing a full debate and delivering that debate with just those minimal notes is a really incredible skill to have. Next, I'll talk about Chandler, or from last week to this week, we've called him Calming Chandler because he has such a good delivery. His strong delivery is both conversational and professional. And one of Chandler's other strengths is he's really good in cross-examination. He's really strong at answering those tough questions. Next, we have Pristine, and Pristine is just one of our well-rounded speakers. She both delivers her content with a lot of passion, but also has really strong content. She understands structure, she understands how to construct an argument, and just putting those two together is a wonderful accomplishment. Next, we have Sriman. Sriman is another one of our experts in research. He has really strong data. He's kind of an expert in logos. Even in SPAR debates and kind of our extemporaneous activities, he was able to, with very limited time to research, he would always have really great data that he would pull out to kind of complement his research and build those strong arguments. And last, we have Ishan. And Ishan's one of those students who understands structure really well. He understands logical reasoning, construction, and just the way he constructs and builds arguments just makes a lot of sense and kind of airtight arguments. We would really appreciate this week, we had our students earlier today complete the student survey, but if you have feedback for us, we would really like to hear what our parents think of our Capital Debate. We really care about this feedback. We want to know both what we're doing well, what's happening that works well with your students, and how to make our camps even better here at Capital Debate. Your students had a lot of fun this week, and if they want to have even more fun, we have several programs that we continue to offer. I mean, we're doing classes all throughout the summer until school starts, and during the school year, we have Club League, which happens, throughout, and your students can continue their progress and their journey in debate. The next step would be 301, but you could also think about Club League throughout the year. We also have a number of different programs that we can offer in terms of legal communication, business, interpersonal, STEM, that kind of continues public speaking and skills they can take not only through high school, but in college. And our students did have a chance to exchange contact information, but they also have each other's Capital Debate email, and they have Zach and I's Capital Debate email. And so we hope that, if your students want to, they can keep in touch with us and they can kind of think about what their next steps are in terms of debate, and we hope to see them again. Before we kind of start for our showcase, I want to just explain the format a little bit. We are kind of moving into something really different, right? We saw last week your students gave these wonderful 4-minute speeches, but this week, you know, we're doing something a little bit different. They're completing an entire debate, and so explaining that format might be helpful for our audience. So we have a pro side and a con side. Our pro side will deliver their opening speech, and then they have time for cross-examination, in which the con side will ask them questions about the speech they delivered. Then our con side will then deliver their opening speech, and then the pro side has time to cross-examine them. The pro side will then give their refutation, the con side will give their refutation, and then we have a closing speech from the pro side and a closing speech from the con side. And you can imagine, I mean, that was a mouthful just explaining the debate format, but you can think of, wow, like that's a huge step from last week to this week in completing that full debate and understanding how all of those debate segments and components work together. And so I would also like to note that today is really just about celebrating our students and their achievements. And so I'm not going to offer any feedback today, but I will email feedback later this weekend. But today's just to celebrate their accomplishments and just see, you know, how hard they worked to make this happen. And so without further delay, I will introduce our first debaters. Our first debaters today are going to be Aman and Ishan. Aman will be advocating for the pro side, and Ishan will be advocating for the con side. They will be debating the resolution of government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm. We'll start with the opening speech from the pro side.
If the government regulated social media, it would be very beneficial and they could stop a lot of harmful things. So the government regulating social media does more good than harm. Today I'm going to be talking about how they can stop cyberbullying, terrorist attacks, and the spread of misinformation. First, I'm going to be talking about cyberbullying. Research stated that 59% of the teens in the United States have been bullied or harassed on social media. Situations like these can cause mental health issues, self-harm, and/or suicide. What the government could do is that they can monitor and take down harmful posts about a teen and stop messages about the teen from going through. For my second main point, I'm going to be talking about terrorism. What are these terrorist groups getting out of social media, and how could the government stop it? An article released by RAND in 2018 stated that 40,000 national foreigners in 110 different countries joined ISIS. ISIS increased internet access in the Middle East and Africa. ISIS, out of this, got a new pool of potential supporters. The same article stated that ISIS was inspired other terrorist groups and attacks. So the 2012 Boston bombings were inspired by ISIS, and the Taliban were inspired to create their own Telegram channel. What the government could do is that they could shut down these accounts and even disband these terrorist groups on social media, so that means they don't have a support group anymore. Lastly, I'm going to be talking about misinformation. Misinformation can be highly dangerous. It can cause death and loss of money from companies. A story about how misinformation is bad is that 2 men injected disinfectant after Trump said that it would help prevent COVID. This is only one example, and these men are likely to recover. But there are others who aren't so lucky. Kansas Poison Control Centers had an increase of 40% of clean chemical cases. The government can make clear on which posts were fake and bookmark it. So today I talked about cyberbullying, terrorist groups using social media, and the spread of misinformation, and how the government could better regulate these cases if they gain control of social media. For all my points today, I should have the government regulation is needed to protect and save lives.
Cross-examination of the pro side.
Can't you just take down the posts by reporting them rather than having the government involved?
I mean, like you could, but also if the government is working towards these terrorist groups, then they should also know information about what they're doing on social media so that they can prepare themselves better.
With the government in control of social media, couldn't they abuse their power?
I think that they wouldn't because they want to keep us safe and they want to do what's best for us in some parts. So I think that from other examples and situations is that they learn from their mistakes and want to keep us safe.
Because so many terror groups are on social media, wouldn't it be easier for companies to regulate their sites rather than the government scouring the internet for them?
Well, if the government already regulated social media, then these social media groups already regulated social media accounts, and these wouldn't be here anymore. And I think that hasn't been done, so the government are the best fit for this.
We're going to move to our opening speech from the con side.
Billions of people use social media worldwide. They trust social media sites to secure their digital data, so it's mind-blowing that the government feels it's okay to backstab its citizens and steal their private information through extensive regulation of social media. The government should not regulate social media and private information of users online. First, I'll talk about multiple constitutions being violated, as well as privacy being breached. Second, I'll talk about biased advertisements and propaganda that can reach every user online. Let's first talk about digital privacy and how it's disregarded by regulations on social media. The First Amendment states that all American citizens have the right to freedom of speech. This means they can speak their mind, no matter the medium, such as a book or an article. What the government is doing is that they're blocking or censoring posts that they don't agree with. This takes away a citizen's voice, and this is in complete violation of the First Amendment. Not only that, but the Fourth Amendment, also known as the right to privacy, is also being violated. The Fourth Amendment says that no American citizen can be unreasonably searched. What the government's doing is that they're stealing millions of unaware people's data. This is an obvious violation of the Fourth Amendment. Because of this, Americans are losing trust in the government. If they're lying to us about this, what other things might they be lying to us about? Moving on, let's talk about extreme government regulations and how it gives too much power to the government. With the power to regulate social media, the government can spread misinformation and propaganda, as well as biased advertisements to every user online. This can have disastrous effects, as shown when Donald Trump, according to BBC News on April 24th, 2020, said that disinfectant can stop the spread of COVID-19. This was obviously misinformation, as many Americans were injured. So many, in fact, that poison control calls were 24 times more common after his tweet in April rather than in January. How can we trust the government if the government doesn't trust us enough to allow us our constitutional rights? In conclusion, the government's regulation of social media violates multiple constitutional rights that Americans deserve, as well as breaches our privacy. Government censorship grants too much power to one group, and they can easily overstep or abuse this power.
So the government is only more than just the president.
So the government may be more than just the president, but the president has a lot of control over the government. And also, most of his believers and American citizens would rather take the president's word over health officials and doctors.
Is there proof of them taking down points that they don't agree with on social media?
There's no proof of that right now, but if the government were given the ability to regulate social medias without any constraint, they could potentially block and censor posts they don't agree with.
Do you think that there would still be think that they would still be breaking the Fourth Amendment if they were doing it to protect us and was still setting some boundaries?
Well, The Fourth Amendment states that all American citizens are exempt from unreasonable searches. What the government is doing is that they're stealing people's data, millions of people's data, without them knowing. So whether it's for a good cause or not, it doesn't matter because they're still violating the Fourth Amendment. And so I don't think that's acceptable.
We're going to move to refutation from the pro side.
So you stated in your speech that if the government regulated social media, it would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and that protects the United States citizens from unneeded searches. But if the government regulated social media, that there is no proof that they would actually violate these rights, but more as control or police the social media accounts to prevent things from happening. But there's no proof that they would take our information.
Refutation from the con side.
So in your speech, you said that 59% of teens have been cyberbullied, which causes mental health issues and can even cause suicide. You said that this can be stopped by government regulation. However, this is false because cyberbullying is so vast, it can't be stopped by the government regulation. There's just too many people. Also, the government has many other things to do other than just preventing cyberbullying on a personal level. Secondly, in your speech, you said that terror groups inspire other people to cause terrorist attacks, such as the Boston bombing. Well, the government regulations of social media can't prevent this because terror groups such as ISIS have other ways of communication other than social media, such as the news or the internet. Same thing goes with what you said when thousands of people joined ISIS in 2018, according to an article. They could still join ISIS even without the use of social media because ISIS has other ways of contacting people and spreading their propaganda.
We have a closing speech from the pro side.
You should be on my side for this argument because if the government regulated social media, then they could stop harmful things from happening and save lives. So for cyberbullying, they could take down harmful posts about a teen, and this can try and help stop self-harm and suicide. For the terrorist attacks, or terrorist groups, if you just ban someone's support group, then it's really hard for them to survive without money or something like with that support. And for misinformation, they would make more clear on which posts were fake or might not, if they didn't know, more bookmark it. And the government has the resources and the materials to do this. And that is why the government regulating social media will be more good than harmful.
We have a closing speech from our con side.
So you mentioned that Donald Trump is he's not the whole government, and he doesn't have the power over the entire government. However, this is false because Donald Trump is a figure of power. He has a lot of control over the government, and people trust him over medical professionals. Secondly, you said that cyberbullying will end from government regulation because they can take down posts that teens find offensive. However, they don't know which posts teens find offensive and which they're just posting for jokes. They can't monitor everyone at a personal level. My argument is better than my opponent's because, as I explained, the government regulation of social media violates our constitutional rights and breaches our privacy. Not only that, but it gives them too much power to spread misinformation and propaganda to everyone. This can have disastrous effects, as shown on April 24th, 2020 by BBC News, when Donald Trump said that injecting disinfectant can help the spread of COVID-19. All in all, government regulation of social media is a violation of our privacy. It takes away a lot of constitutional rights. It gives them too much power to spread misinformation and propaganda, and this can be disastrous for the general public.
Our second debaters today are Chandler and Sriman. Chandler will be on the pro side, Sriman will be on the con side, and they're arguing for the same resolution. Government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm.
According to a new report published earlier this week, the University of Oxford found that roughly one-third of social media users across the United States, with Argentina, Germany, South Korea, Spain, and the United Kingdom, reported seeing false or misleading information about the coronavirus. A solution to this will be government regulation. The government should regulate social media because it does more good than harm. Today I will discuss 3 reasons why regulation of social media companies is beneficial because it will prevent misinformation, cyberbullying, and hate speech. First, I will talk about misinformation. First, I will talk about misinformation. My first reason is that misinformation is very dangerous. According to Forbes in April 2020, a new report from the Reboot Foundation reveals that not only is social media a source of misinformation on COVID-19, but the more time people spend on platforms like Twitter, the less informed they are on the virus spread and its prevention. Heavy users of social media are also more likely to take a laid-back attitude toward the pandemic in general. This shows how misinformation on social media is an extremely important problem because people can die due to misinformation. Now that I've discussed misinformation, I'll move on to my second point of cyberbullying. My second reason is that cyberbullying has too big of a role in increasing suicide rates. According to the Cyberbullying Research Center, in 2018, students who experienced in real life bullying and cyberbullying were more than 5 times as likely to report suicidal ideation. Thus, experiencing both forms of bullying builds up the negative effects and greatly increases the likelihood of suicidal ideation among adolescents. Now that I have discussed cyberbullying, I'll move on to my third point of hate speech. My third reason is that we should have laws that punishes social media companies for the spread of hate speech on their platforms, like they have in Australia. According to Time magazine in April 2019, criticism of social media happened for enabling the live broadcast of last month's Christchurch, New Zealand mosque massacres, illegally carried out by an Australian man that left 50 dead. Platforms struggled to remove the content even after the broadcast was taken down. Last week, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg called for governments and regulators to play a more active role in suppressing harmful content. Therefore, the government should step in and help social media companies take down harmful content. Today, I offered 3 reasons why government regulation of social media companies is beneficial to the public. The government should regulate social media because it helps prevent misinformation, cyberbullying, and hate speech. Overall, social media regulations need to change now to support the users all around the world.
I'm going to move into cross-examination of the pro side.
Point, you stated that information about cyberbullying, and can't the people that are getting targeted just ignore the messages?
They can't just ignore the messages because the message will hit them personally when they see it on their phone.
How would the government be able to stop cyberbullying?
The government will be able to stop cyberbullying by flagging posts that are cyberbullying someone or taking down alt accounts.
Would we actually be able to prevent any of the shootings, or just people about posting videos on the shootings that have already happened?
We can't prevent these shootings in real life, but we can prevent the videos of the shootings on social media.
Who is posting misinformation on social media?
Anyone can be posting misinformation on social media because they have the right to free speech.
We're going to move into the opening speech from the con side.
Do you think that social media owners should take responsibility for themselves? Well, I think that government regulation of social media companies does not do more good than harm. I will be talking about the reasons why the government regulation of social media companies does not do more good than harm. Let's talk about the first reason. Government regulation will stifle innovation online. According to the Observer Research Foundation, the government should not do any social media regulation that must be done. Collective experience over many industries has shown that government regulations stifle innovation and create monopolies. So that the high cost of complying with regulation inhibits competition since it discourages the upstarts from entering a market. It also disproportionately harms existing smaller players. So for a country that desperately needs more startups, innovation, entrepreneurship, and investments, social media regulations will trigger exits and discourage new investments. Also, according to the USA Today on July 19, 2018, government regulation could prevent the next Facebook or the next Google from ever entering the social media space. Silicon Valley's investors would be more than reluctant to invest in a company that can only innovate within the barriers dictated by the government policy. So what that does to us, it gives us a pride of ownership and to our companies. My second point, social media companies should self-regulate. According to The Hill on August 9, 2012, social media companies are private companies. They're not government actors, so they don't have to respect the First Amendment. BBC News, February 12, 2020. Facebook, which owns Instagram, has more than 35,000 people around the world working on safety and security, so it also releases statistics on its content removals. Between July and September 2019, it took action on 30.3 million pieces of content, of which it found 98.4% before any of the users flagged the content. Social media becomes biased. According to Cato Institute, April 9, 2019, President Trump recently complained that Google searches are biased against Republicans and conservatives. Also, according to Cato Institute, April 9, they have said that the US Supreme Court has decided that private companies in general are not bound by the First Amendment. This reduces the amount of companies being held up by the government regulation. In conclusion, the government has the rights to regulate social media, but it makes the social media more biased and unjust, which makes no one wanting to use that platform. So I have talked about how the government should not regulate social media and all of the effects. I think that government regulation on social media companies does not do more good than harm. So we should put an end to this, because when the government regulates something you own, but 40% of it gets controlled by the government, it gets unfair. Thank you.
I'm going to move to cross-examination of the con side.
If Facebook doesn't flag fake news posts, wouldn't that hurt the company?
Yes, it would, but people do more research before they repost that Facebook post.
How would Facebook regulate themselves better if they were already supposed to regulate things like cyberbullying?
Facebook has around 45,000 people working worldwide, so that they have more than enough people to regulate other things just as important as cyberbullying.
What do you mean when you say companies are not bound by the First Amendment?
When I say that the companies are not bound by the First Amendment or people, we have freedom of speech, so that the First Amendment is freedom of speech, so that the companies can talk back and get their point well said.
We'll move to refutation from the pro side.
In your first point, you state that if the government regulates social media, then innovation will stifle. Actually, if social media companies sell or take your information, that would slow innovation down. There have been many stories about this happening to companies. Therefore, the government should step in and help social media companies regulate their platform. In your second point, you state that social media companies should self-regulate. But how would social media companies self-regulate themselves if what they were doing was not working earlier? Therefore, the government should step in and help social media companies regulate their platform.
We're going to move to refutation from the con side.
In your first main point, you stated that the more time that people spend on social media, the less informed people are. Actually, social media educates people. People read the news on social media, and in some cases, that's the way that people get informed. Even myself, I get the news from social media, but I've never gotten misinformation to me. But if I do, I check before I do something big with it or I repost it. So therefore, I don't think that the time that people spend on social media is less informed.
We have a closing speech from the pro side.
In your refutation, you state that social media educates you. Actually, you might, just because you haven't found misinformation on social media doesn't mean other people haven't. To make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone, the government should step in and help social media companies regulate their platform. In your refutation, you state that the government should regulate social media because it does more good than harm. The government will help prevent misinformation, cyberbullying, and hate speech on their platform. In the end, social media needs to change policies to ensure that users have a great experience on their platform.
And we have a closing speech from the con side.
In your refutation, you stated that social media spreads misinformation and that the smaller companies would absorb the data and use it. Well, the smaller industries won't use misinformation if they know what is false and what is right. Also, according to the USA Today on July 19th, 2018, government regulations could prevent the next Facebook or the next Google from ever entering the social media space. So Silicon Valley investors would be more than reluctant to invest in a company that could actually only innovate within the barriers dictated by the government policy. This shows that the government affects our business and is even worse for the newcomers. Therefore, the newcomers won't want their companies to go down the hill, so they would most likely dodge the bullet and not use misinformation. Finally, I have talked about how the government should not regulate social media and why it impacts the smaller companies and the bigger companies as well.
Our final debaters today are Ava Grace and Pristine. Ava Grace on the pro side, Pristine on the con side. Debating the resolution, government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm.
Government regulation is extremely beneficial. Let me tell you why. Government regulation does more good than harm. Today I will discuss 3 reasons why government regulation is beneficial. First, the government can censor inappropriate material. Second, the government can prevent cyberbullying. And third, the government can create policies to protect our data. My first point is moderation of hurtful content. Social media being run by the government using some of the practices other countries use would help with keeping platforms an appropriate place for all users, filtering out terrorist videos, videos involving crime or abuse, as well as videos of hateful speech towards people. According to BBC News on February 12, 2020, Germany and the EU use a fine policy. You post something inappropriate such as terrorist or sexual content, the social media company gets a fine if not taken down within the hour, depending on the content. Content regulations would help filter out offensive content and work towards things such as racial and religious harmony. Filtering out inappropriate content will ensure the platform stays a safe place for children, teens, and even adults. The impact here is that it would make the internet a safer place no matter what age, as well as work towards harmony for all religious and racial backgrounds. For my second point, I'll talk about cyberbullying. Government regulation can help with cyberbullying. Lessening cyberbullying can help with suicide prevention and mental health. According to Science Daily, on July 3rd, 2020, 19.2% of parents stated that their child has been bullied through social media. An average of 28% of teens have reported to being bullied through social media as well. A study by Swansea University found that people under the age of 25 that are exposed to cyberbullying are twice as likely to commit suicide and practice self-harm. What classifies as cyberbullying, you may ask? Well, having explicit images of you shared without consent, physical threat, constant asking of where they are, who they are with, and what they are doing by someone other than a parent, constant receiving of explicit images they didn't ask for, spreading of false rumors, and offensive name calling, as well as other things. Cyberbullying impacts teens today because it can potentially lead to suicide, mental health issues, and self-harm. My third point is that government can help with data privacy. Government regulations will help with keeping your data secure. According to McAfee on December 3rd, 2018, 22% of people stated that they have been hacked at least once. 14% of people stated that they've been hacked more than once, and earlier that year, Facebook got hacked, revealing more than 50 million users' identities. Just think about the information that was kept that they didn't want kept or thought they had deleted. Well, there's a way it could be. Just look at the EU's right to be forgotten policy that America can use. According to BBC News on September 24th, 2019, the right to be forgotten means that citizens have the power to have any information or data be completely deleted from all search engines. The benefit of this is that you'll be able to remove slanderous or embarrassing information and past content from public view. You'll be able to, it's an opportunity to give the individual a new beginning at life, completely remove data that might jeopardize a career or safety, and so on. Just think how this would improve our privacy. Social media companies can no longer steal your data, and anything you want deleted is completely deleted. This would help lessen things like people being hacked by an identity theft, and citizens will have a greater overall safety and protection on their personal information. In conclusion, government regulation would improve social media and make social media a happier and safer place. Today, I discussed 3 reasons why government regulation is beneficial. First, the government can censor inappropriate materials. Second, the government can prevent cyberbullying. Third, the government can create policies to protect our data. These factors demonstrate that government regulation does more good than harm. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Couldn't the government over-censor us?
Well, the government could over-censor us, but within the 25 federal governments, there's 3 branches, and within those branches are accountability points, which would keep them from over-censoring us and make sure they're accountable for what they censor.
Couldn't social media companies just self-regulate?
Well, social medias could self-regulate like they are right now, but with the things that I mentioned, regulation of social media companies is not doing a good enough job at stopping or fixing those things. So having the government step in would help overall with making them a safer place and happier place.
Couldn't social media companies make policies themselves to prevent cyberbullying?
Social media companies could make policies, but they aren't, right? Like they aren't making them fast enough. So why wait around and let more people and more kids every single day get cyberbullied when the government could step in to help stop it even faster?
Couldn't the government abuse access to our data?
They could, but they wouldn't sell it like social media companies do. Social media companies sell our data and harvest off of it to places like China, but the government has no reason to sell our data and our information.
We're going to move to the opening speech from the con side.
According to a Pew Research Center 2019 study, the number of American adults using social media went from 5% to a shocking 72%. Think about what would happen if all this information got into the wrong hands. Government regulation on social media companies does more harm than good. We will discuss how government regulation on social media companies would limit our free speech, invade our privacy, and harm the communication of ideas. Firstly, we will discuss how government regulation would restrict our free speech. This is true because the government could easily abuse its power. According to John Samples, a vice president of the Cato Institute, in a 2019 report, he stated that government officials may attempt directly or obliquely to compel tech companies to suppress disfavored speech. We've seen the government abuse their power in the past, an example being McCarthyism during the Cold War. This essentially was a US Senator, Joseph McCarthy, abusing his political power as a government official to conduct investigations on people who allegedly had communist beliefs. This resulted in thousands of people losing their jobs and many lives being ruined. The government has abused their power in the past, can easily do it again by suppressing our speech through regulation on social media companies. In order for us to continue to live in a democracy, we can't allow the government to have the power to ruin our lives. Secondly, we will discuss how government regulation on social media companies would invade our privacy. This is true because the government could easily monitor and collect personal information on us. The government has spied on us in the past. According to a 2014 BBC article, a man by the name of Edward Snowden leaked information on how the government had been surveilling tens of millions of Americans. The government had been collecting information on internet and phone records. This huge breach of privacy caused an enormous scandal. Considering the vast amount of information that can be found in social media today, it would be very easy for the government to abuse our access to our data and unreasonably monitor us, and they probably would if they had the chance to, as they could easily hide anything from us. According to the Fourth Amendment, the government is not allowed to conduct any unreasonable searches and seizures, but allowing the government to regulate social media companies would give them the perfect opportunity to do this without getting caught. We need to have the right to our own privacy, but allowing the government access to our personal data is unacceptable. Thirdly, we will discuss how government regulation on social media companies would harm the communication of ideas. This is true because in order for change to happen, opinions need to be heard. For the longest time, material supporting and advocating for the LGBTQ+ community was considered controversial and offensive to some. According to Philip Ayub, Associate Professor of Diplomacy and World Affairs at Occidental College, social media was a huge factor in helping advocate for these people's rights. Since information was able to be freely expressed, positive changes were able to occur. However, if the government had the power to regulate social media, and if they had not agreed with these values and opinions, they could have easily censored and prevented these needed changes to happen. Times are changing, and communication is key for progress. Therefore, government regulation on social media companies inhibits our free speech, invades our privacy, and hurts the communication of ideas. Therefore, government regulation does more harm than it does good. In order to protect the safe space of ideas, it is imperative that we don't give the government more power than they already have.
We're going to move to cross-examination of the con side.
You mentioned how government regulation would limit our free speech, but isn't it true that social media does not have to follow the First Amendment, so they can take down whatever they want to take down that they don't agree with, speech-wise?
It's true that the social media companies could take down whatever they want. However, if the government had the power to regulate, they could hide anything from us and they could censor things and we wouldn't even know, which is even scarier.
Well, with what do you mean by hide? Because wouldn't we notice if stuff that we usually see is just randomly getting censored?
They could potentially hide, like for example, we didn't know that we were being surveilled by the government and that they were keeping track of our internet and phone records until somebody decided to release and leak that information. Similarly, we wouldn't know if they're censoring information from us.
As well as you mentioned the Fourth Amendment, wouldn't the government violating our Fourth Amendment be illegal, and wouldn't they stop that if they noticed someone was violating our Fourth Amendment?
That's exactly it. It is illegal, but if they have the power, they could get away with it without being caught.
As well as, how are you sure that they would, since, for example, your example, pro-LGBTQ stuff, they would censor that. How do you know that they would censor that since that is so normalized nowadays? How are you sure that they wouldn't censor homophobic, racist, sexist stuff instead? The more controversial stuff now.
They would obviously censor those things, but certain ideas that are coming up now that may be considered controversial may be normalized in the future. But if they have the power to regulate it and they don't agree with those opinions, then we'll never know and we'll never be able to have progress.
Okay.
We're going to move to the refutation speech from our pro side.
My opponent mentioned the hurting our free speech. Now, with government regulation, this would actually let us exercise our free speech more, because like social media is a privately owned company, so they can decide whatever they don't like, if they don't like what you're talking about, no matter what it is, they can take it down. With the government would allow within the First Amendment right to talk about all the stuff that we're allowed to within the First Amendment right, besides extreme hate speech and whatnot. So with government regulation, we can exercise our First Amendment right way more than we can with social media regulation. As well as, she talked about invading of privacy. Now, our privacy is more invaded with social media regulation because social media harvests off our data, selling it to other countries, other governments. For example, like China, they harvest off of that. The American government would not need to harvest off of Americans' data. As well as, social media is way easier to hack, just like how I mentioned how Facebook got hacked and revealed over 50 million users' identities and information. Now, the government can get hacked, but it's less likely and easier for the government to counterdict if they're getting hacked. She also mentioned controversial material needs to stay. Now, controversial material now is very different than what it was in the past. And the three branches of government are heavily influenced by the public. So, for example, the pro-LGBTQ is controversial material would not necessarily get censorized. What would get censorized is immoral and injustice material. Thank you.
We're going to move to the refutation speech of our con side.
In my opponent's first argument, she stated that the government would protect the public from harmful content. However, social media companies are perfectly capable of protecting us from that harmful content. The government can over-censor things and we wouldn't even know, and they've abused their power in the past, so we don't know if they would do it again. Social media companies, on the other hand, can set up policies and regulate harmful content and take down anything that can be flagged as inappropriate or explicit. Therefore, social media companies are perfectly capable of regulating their own content. In my opponent's second argument, she stated that the government would help prevent cyberbullying, but social media companies can also regulate cyberbullying. Social media companies can set up policies, can start campaigns, and take down anything that can be considered cyberbullying. Therefore, social media companies can regulate cyberbullying, and the government does not need to have to step in for that. In my opponent's third argument, she stated that the government would protect our data. However, social media companies can protect our data as well. The government could also get hacked, and they can easily violate and abuse their access to our data. The social media companies are often heavily influenced by the public as well, so they wouldn't do anything outrageous. Therefore, social media companies can protect our data privacy, and governments don't have to get involved.
We're going to move to the closing speech of our pro side.
My opponent mentioned that social media can step up its game and stand up to protect us and protect our data. Well, government needs to move in, because instead of us just standing here waiting for social media to step up their game, government can actively and quickly protect us way faster and way easier, since they do have more computer stuff, more people working to help us. She also mentioned that the government can over-censor. Now, like I said, out of the 25 federal governments and 3 branches within the government, that they keep it, there's accountability points. So if they notice that someone is over-censoring against the amendments or the laws, then they will catch it and they will put it into it. As well as social media can put campaigns up and stuff for cyberbullying. Social media can't, a cyberbully seeing a campaign telling them to stop cyberbullying isn't going to make them necessarily stop. But also, most of the time, people that report cyberbullying to social media companies get swept under the rug. With the government, they will have more people looking for cyberbullies and more people ready to ban people's accounts and to help others that need help with cyberbullying. Now, she mentioned how the government can also get hacked, but it is way less likely for the government to get hacked than a social media company, because it is more difficult, as well as the government getting hacked can be caught and stopped way easier. And my first point was about monitoring inappropriate content. My second point was about cyberbullying, and my third point was about data privacy. Now, the matter of the fact is that the government is going to do a way better job at monitoring and protecting us from this stuff. There is a low chance that it will abuse their power within all the types of governments. And government regulation would just do a better job overall. Thank you.
And finally, we have a closing speech from our con side.
In response to my first point, my opponent argued that the government would not harm our free speech. However, this is not true, because the government has not had the best history with regulating our speech. McCarthyism is a perfect example of the government abusing our power to free speech. We don't know what they could be censoring from us, and so it's riskier. With social media companies, we're more likely to know. Social media companies can regulate themselves, and therefore the government would in fact hurt our free speech. In response to my second point, my opponent argued that the government would not abuse their access to our data. However, her argument does not stand, because the government has not had the best experience and history with our data. The government has surveilled tens of millions of Americans in the past and collected information that we did not give consent to. Like social media companies, the government consists of human beings who can easily be corrupt. They can use their data for their own personal benefits and to help push their own political agendas. We don't know what they could do with our data, as it's very difficult to know what the government is doing, as they can hide anything from us. Whereas with social media companies, we are more likely to figure out what is happening, and social media companies are highly influenced by the public as well. Government regulation on social media companies does more harm than it does good. Firstly, government regulation inhibits our free speech, as they can easily abuse their power. In a democracy, we cannot allow the government to have too much power over our lives. And with government regulation, our privacy would be invaded, as they could easily surveil, monitor, and collect information on us. We deserve our right to our own privacy, but allowing the government to have access to such information is unacceptable. The government also would easily hurt the communication of ideas, as opinions would not be as freely expressed. Times are changing, and communication is key for progress. So the next time that you go onto social media, just remind yourself that you have rights, and nobody, not even the government, can change that.
Wow, those were 3 really excellent debates. I'm so proud of our students this week. Again, going from a 4-minute speech to completing a full debate, learning cross-examination, learning about refutation, really learning more about constructing an opening and closing speech. That was so much to accomplish in just 1 week. Thank you for spending another week with Capitol Debate. I'm so glad I got to work with your students for a second week. I hope that you spend this evening and this weekend celebrating their achievements, and we really hope that you enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
miss you
you.
guys.
Thank
You guys did such a great job.
Thank you.